Let us pray. We thank you, dear God, for the incredible gift of this church. And we place the gift that you have given us in this church in your hands. We ask that you'd protect it and look over it and watch over all of its people and lead us to do what you would have us to do. And give us the work that you would want us to do. And most of all, empower us through your Spirit to do the work you have given us to do. These things we ask in your name. Amen. So to give a little bit of a background on what today is meant to be, it's meant to be a time to listen to you, to answer any questions. This particular gathering is small. That doesn't mean that this gathering is unimportant. Each of you plays an incredibly important role in what we're doing. And to give you a little bit of background in the background statement, we've decided to follow the best advice and to follow best practices, which is, in addition to having an opportunity for people to do some focused interviews, a kind of random group of people that we picked, we also want to provide opportunities for the entire congregation to speak about this capital campaign. And so the very same information that was shared with our interviewees is now being shared with the congregation. So last week, you all received a copy of this background statement, which divided our projects into 4 basic projects. There's projects that are to do with the program building and sitting inside this building, in which it's just a nice, tight, I would say 85 degrees here right now, maybe 90. I think we're at 90. You don't have to go to Florida anymore, Judge. You can just come right here and just sit here, and you could wear a floral shirt and you'll feel like a millionaire. So this area would go through some significant renovation. We've expanded our work on it so that we're going to actually do the first floor, which is the floor underneath us, is going to get worked on as well. And then we also are going to open up some space across the way, because we've realized every time we've built at this church's history, we've always somehow filled out the space sooner or later. The second thing that we're doing is we're improving our accessibility in the landscape around us and providing some more safety in the landscape around us by having some dedicated entrances that have 0 grade. And if you go to many of the places these days, the other day I was driving by All Seasons and Cedar Brook, which is kind of the thing I do. I spend a lot of time with senior living places, and all of them have these kinds of 0 grades where it's easy for you to move in and out of the building. We also need to increase our parking for handicapped people. We also need to increase the number of parking spots we have. And we also need to create a kind of prayerful environment and a welcoming environment, even as welcoming as this church is. And then there's 2 other projects we have. We have a larger project in music of renovating the main organ. We also have a project in finishing off a focus campaign that we began on St. Dunstan's organ. And then we have a special project to create a fund for the music department, which follows some of the best thinking that we have around us, which is that music programs need to be guided by endowments, because those endowments help you meet the daily needs of everybody. And then finally, we do a special project in mission and outreach, because that's always been the bread and butter of this church. So we're building up a fund in mission and outreach. So those are the 4 main projects. And we've asked you in the questionnaire to go through, to talk about your feelings about the church, to talk about where you are with regard to those projects, and then also to give some kind of indication of how you might want to be helpful. So that's it. Do you want to? Some of you, Barry, you immediately grabbed a pen, which is a really positive sign. But I also want to say a couple of things that I said at the piece last week. Which is that I'm not going to ask any of you to give something that I'm not willing to support myself fully and sacrificially. So the 5-year gift is something I'm going to take advantage of, and the gift that I will give will be sacrificial, and it will be large. And I do that because I love this congregation, and I'm grateful for it. And I also want to say to you all that I will stay with this congregation as long as you will have me. I said something last week where I said there's always a time when you have to turn in the keys. As rector, I don't want that to be sounding as if I'm trying to move on. But I want you to actually know that I plan to stay here as long as you'll have me. And particularly when I think about this capital campaign, one of the reasons why I stepped away from being a dean of a university in Canada is because in that system, the deans had to negotiate the labor contracts with the labor unions. And I did one of those, and I thought, I don't want to do any more of these. This is just not, there's not enough money in the world to pay me to negotiate one of these deals again. And I don't want to say that I feel exactly the same about this capital campaign, but I am so grateful that my job involves so much more than this. And so my goal is not to make this capital campaign a stepping stone to greater things. My job is to actually just build on this church for the future. And then the third thing that I want you to know is that there are many people that will tell you that they would rather give their money to the poor than to the church. And I respect the moral motivation behind that. I think that if God is calling you to give money to the poor, you should. But I would want you to know that every sociological study that's been done, particularly a major one in 2011, found that the people who gave money to the church, they themselves gave more money to the poor. And also that the money that you give to the church, particularly in this context in which you have good checks and balances, that money tends to generate even more giving beyond itself, almost always. Think about a major fundraising we did for Hurricane Harvey last year. That began because someone gave to the church a matching gift of $15,000. And we raised from that matching gift of $15,000, $75,000, which was astounding. So, any questions you have, happy to answer. Linda. Even though there's 6 of us here, we need to use that because we're trying to, yeah.
Okay. So, assuming everyone is in favor of this, when would this capital campaign begin? Question 1.
Mm-hmm.
Question 2, when would the actual construction begin? And then how long would this construction take? And what about cost overruns, which are always an issue?
So let me begin with the last part. We have factored in estimates for all of this plus about 20%, because we're just assuming there's going to be cost overruns. And that's the only way to do it. We have to be careful about that, and we have to be thinking about that all the time. The best way to avoid cost overruns is to make sure you're doing what you're doing when you dig. So as we move forward to the construction phase, we are going to have many people involved and many people thinking through these things. I know that there's a familiar response that you hear that an elephant is a camel designed by committee or something like that, right? So you can't make every decision based on consensus, because you'll never get there. And I can give you actually some physical examples of things that I think were a mistake that other churches have done. But we will be doing as much as we can. We want to pick out what we need to get done when we need to get it done. In terms of the timetable for the construction and in terms of the timetable for the capital campaign, after we go through this feasibility phase, we're going to spend some time thinking about how to proceed. And we'll go through what many people call the quiet phase of campaign, which is we're going to solicit some leading gifts, which will give us an idea of how realistic we can be. And then as we go through that quiet phase, that's a time of discernment, and there's going to be times in which we think about the sequence of our building and the sequence of how to do it in the most efficient way possible. So we're going to look at, as you know, there's a landscape portion to this or an accessibility portion to this that covers the ground outside, and then you have the construction inside here. It would probably be really unwise for us to do the landscape first and then try to do the construction, right? I say that without being Mike Holmes, right? I can say that. but there might be a sequencing that comes online that says, begin with the parking lot, begin with the piazza, and then move into the construction here. I'm not saying that's going to happen at all, but I'm saying that there's different ways you sequence an event like this. We're also going to be looking for space nearby. Our goal is to be about 12 months out of the program building. So we will still use the sanctuary. The sanctuary will still be operational. The guild hall will still be operational on Sundays. We'll still be able to do funerals. All of those things will all be used and online the entire time. But this area will be going through construction. When will depend on how quickly we raise the money. We don't want to raise the money. You want it to be somewhere between 80% and 100% when you start to build, is the going beliefs. With a project like this, I'm not sure when that tipping point is going to be, when we realize it's going to be feasible. But that's going to require discernment. So every step of the way, we're going to be continuing to do discernment among the leadership of the parish. And every step of the way, we're going to be seeking your input as we go forward, and we're going to be open to all the good ideas that are there. Sure, why not? I go over here and get my coffee, Linda.
I know my questions are always a bit daunting.
No, it's good.
One thing that
Came prepared.
Yeah, one thing I've been thinking of, which I did not earlier mention, is grants.
Yeah.
And as you know, because you were there, Grace Episcopal did a huge renovation. And they were able, I believe, to get donations that were tax deductible because of the historic legacy nature of the structure of the building of the church. So is any thought being given to that? And churches are getting grants. They are.
Yes. And you will no doubt know that I've got a good record of getting grants. Yeah, I've been able to raise over the past 5 years here, 4 years and change, I've raised close to, I would say, 900,000 in grants. So I can't imagine that skill evading me. Yeah. Any other questions? Yay, Barry, I'm so excited.
To get away from the building for a minute.
Yeah, good idea.
Christ Church has had an incredible position in Detroit and in the Episcopal Church, that our watershed seems to be getting bigger and bigger, and we're getting more people. Are we taking people away from other churches, and so our gains are their losses? And if so, where do you see Christ Church? Is it going to be like a mini cathedral that people from the smaller churches come here once a Sunday or something like, once a month or something like that?
That's a really good question. And I think that we've got a fair number of people like Vanessa, who was baptized here. And we have a lot of adults who have actually come to their faith here, that this is the church they know. And some of them are in major leadership positions across the church. So the canon at the American Cathedral in Paris, her name is, I think, Mary. I'm blanking on her last. I think Mary Haddad is what I want to say, but I could have it completely wrong. She was baptized through Christ Church Cranbrook. So this church has always had a kind of special role to play in people's lives in terms of people who have never had a faith before. What I think is happening is, as other churches are unable to provide the resources that people need, and primarily that's in Sunday school, as those churches are unable to mount a Sunday school program, parents who are getting ready to educate their children are finding places where there are education programs ongoing. And so that's been an incredible thing that we've been doing, and we have brought in a number of people. We've also been able to have a time of stability, a relative stability here. and other places have been going through a time of relative instability. And whenever that happens, people tend to go to the high ground. I think that the core of your question is, what is it going to look like for us in relationship to our partner churches in the future? And I think the Lilly grant that we got of developing ties across denominations and across racial divides and economic divides in the city, picking up on work that was meant to begin in 1957 with the Institute of Advanced Pastoral Leadership, I think all of that is going to be is going to remain important work, and I think all of that work is going to leverage new relationships. So the future of the Episcopal Church is going to be that our partnerships are going to be less denominationally aligned, and they're going to be more ecumenical by necessity. And the future of our church might be that we continue to be the resource church for the diocese and for the community. So yesterday we had an Enneagram retreat, which had a fair amount of people from beyond Christchurch Cranbrook. We had about 30 people there who took part in it, and it was a really important resource that we could do. We've got to work closely and with very little distance or space between ourselves and the diocese. We have to be seen as the partner to the diocese, and the diocese needs to be, in many ways, our partner as well. And over the last year or so, the two have been walking towards each other. In part, they began to walk towards each other when Michael Curry came to preach. And the diocese and the church worked together to make sure that that visit was a success. And that was a beginning point. But over the last year in particular, we've begun to really think about, what is this going to be? And I think with a new bishop coming on, a very different kind of energy is going to come into things for us. And that's we're going to have to think about what it means to be a church. So those are good questions. I hope I've answered them somewhat.
Go ahead. Well, let me just, sorry, let me finish off.
Why not?
You say,
That's right.
our future,
Exactly. Yeah, where's my intern?
our future is ecumenical. Now, the three other parishes in the area that I know are St. Stephen's, Troy,
Sure.
St. Philip's, Rochester Hills, and All
Yeah.
Saints in Pontiac.
Sure.
I happen to think that Anglicanism is a little bit above all the others, but I'm conceited. But I do know several parishioners from those three parishes have decided to leave the Episcopal Church and go to other churches in the area
Yeah.
because they couldn't travel or didn't want to travel from Rochester Hills or Pontiac to come down here.
Yeah. And we can't solve every problem. We can only do what God's asked us to do. And, it matters that All Saints Pontiac thrive. And so it's important for us to do what we can to support the work of All Saints Pontiac. It's also those, St. Philip's is doing well. St. Stephen's is in the midst of a search. Our job is not to put those churches out of business. Our job is to lift up Christ here. I think that it's always a challenge for us to try to find the win-win. And it's partly because we do have some people that move back and forth. Over the past 4 years, we've had several wonderful people come here from St. Stephen's for different reasons. And we usually listen really closely to the reasons why people are affiliating. Sometimes it's to follow a priest. Sometimes it's to engage in the mission here. And what I've done, and I'm not sure if God will reward me for this or not, but it just seems like the only thing that is right to do. I had somebody who came here for purely negative reasons, which is that she was hurt by the church during the transition. It wasn't because she felt drawn here by something, which is usually the case with the latter. And so I told her to wait at least 2 years before becoming a member. because it's a little bit like going through a divorce or going through a death. You need some time to grieve. So that's how we're doing it on a microeconomic level. But on a macroeconomic level, it's hard to know what's going to happen. What studies have shown, and this is a recent study by a sociologist named Chavez, shows that big churches are growing. And it's showing that little churches are shrinking. And that means that the visibility of Christianity is actually growing, but the actual numerical strength of Christianity is continuing to decline, which this helps understand why the myths of religious decline, what is at work in that. And so, in a sense, not that I would ever want to be the next bishop, because I don't want to be that person, really. But what we really need to do as the Episcopal Church is we have to start founding large churches rather than small churches. The old days of like starting a small church and growing it up, that it's too chaotic right now. So, other questions?
I've got a couple of questions.
Sure, please.
I don't know, whether it was 6 months ago or whatever it was in this room, we had a big crowd where one of the questions that was asked was the preservation of the architecture of this church, and
Yeah.
very strongly said by whoever said it. I can't remember who said it. The second question relates to my experience is that particularly when you have large donors to start with, which is very important, you're going to have a lot of donors who are going to tell you, I'm not going to give to the general fund, I'm going to specifically give for this X, Y, or Z project. I just wondered what you're going to do when that happens.
Well, that's, to begin with your second question, segmented giving is often a part of capital campaigns. And so there are certain things that people are going to want to support and certain things that they're not going to want to support. So particularly with the way we've set out the kind of menu of issues that we're facing and opportunities that we're facing, I'm quite sure that the people who are, there are many people who want to give to one without wanting to give to the other. So we're going to do segmented giving, just because our job is to further the mission of the church. In terms of the, but we would, if you wanted to make an enormous leadership gift that's unrestricted to the capital campaign, Judge, I would take it. Because that will help us make up and help us deal with the priorities. Because there's certain things that we've done a really good job of communicating about, and there's others that require some more communication. So the accessibility that we're doing outside of the parish, outside of the walls of the church, in the grounds of the church, not many people seem to know enough about that. And I actually think, and many people who have looked at it in committee, we think that that's actually the most exciting opportunities before us. So there are certain things that we have to do more education about, and certain things we're just a little bit behind on because our thinking on it developed late. In terms of preservation, we've got an agreement with our current architect that every one of these things, for example, right behind you have these incredible leaded windows. Now, no one's going to confuse those with something from the medieval period. They're not like historically valuable. We couldn't sell them on Antiques Roadshow and get $1 million, but they're incredibly important for our identity. So things like those windows are going to be preserved and then deployed in the new building in a way that highlights continuity with what we have. If you'll notice, when we did the new program building, in which we're kind of sitting in the basement of, today, mostly it's right over here, right? That was done with an entirely different architectural style than the rest of the church. And one of the things that hasn't come through on everything we've shared with you to date, but which will come through, is the vision of the architect is actually to create a kind of continuous architectural building. So that means that you'll see a kind of leaded glass look as you go away and look around them. And it can be done well. The second thing you'll notice is if you go upstairs, you have these incredible tongue and groove paneling in the program building. And even though that's not, again, like you couldn't sell that on Antiques Roadshow. It's not in itself valuable, but we're gonna take that paneling and we're gonna cut it in half, and we're gonna create wainscoting a little bit like this, so that the entire addition is gonna have that paneling all the way through. And that way, there's some continuity, and there's groups and firms that come in and do that during the demolition phase. They take the things you want to keep, and then they redeploy them in the new campus. Does that help?
Yeah, part of I can't remember when it was, but I can remember very well, vividly, when the lawyers came in and told the church, and they told the schools and the rest of Cranbrook at the time, you got to separate. We can't have any longer a religious and an educational program under the same roof.
Yeah.
From a giving standpoint of view. And since then, as far as the other parts of the Cranbrook community are concerned, if you look around, you'll see some of the places which have had additions, which the additions are certainly very palatable with the Saarinen designed, other additions which I didn't think the architect probably went to school. I don't know where they hired the architect.
Right.
But, so I think that's a very important issue. And this addition here was a very important issue with the Booth family. And you have the people in the Booth family who have historically said, I want to give and I want to support Cranbrook, but in order for me to give, this is what you're going to have to do. And Henry Booth was one of them who I knew very well. Henry designed the original buildings at Brookside, and he had a very heavy influence on what you're talking about above us here. So I think the importance of making sure that the architecture is compatible with the original designs of this place is extremely important.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I'm not trying to settle any fights or anything, but if you look back at last spring, we had a presentation in which someone said, you got to do something that's more dramatic. And so I went and met with the architect that person wanted us to meet with, and they kind of wanted this beautiful kind of entryway that was going to be like, he said, just blow out these bathrooms. And as soon as he said, blow out the bathrooms, I was like, oh no, I can't do this, because like this is the program building. This is not the sanctuary. You need a bathroom here, right? We can't go short in a bathroom, right? If anything, we're going to add a bathroom, right? And so I don't want to see that as disrespect to that person or the invitation. I'll talk to anybody. I think keeping that kind of continuity is really important for our next step. The second thing I want to say is it's going to require more than Henry Booth to tell us what to do. I love this church, and I love the Booths, and I'm grateful for the Booths. But this is not going to be one person coming in and holding the purse strings and saying, I'll only give if you do this. I will begin a negotiation, because after all, I have worked with labor unions. But I'm not going to get, none of us should allow ourselves to leave a decision with one person, and that includes me.
I don't want you to get a big head.
Yeah.
Probably never will have a big head, but to me, this campaign is good. I can't envision in the last 40 years or whatever it's been since I've been going here, any rector who has a congregation the way you do now, who is supportive enough to be able to put on a campaign. That requires support from the congregation, and I think in the 4 years you've been here, whatever it is, you have been able to develop that, and the campaign is, when it is successful, which I think it is going to be because of your leadership.
I appreciate you saying that very much, Judge, because I respect you a great deal. And so I know you wouldn't say things that were untrue, or at least that you didn't believe to be true, so thank you. Please.
So I was super excited about the endowments. So can you tell us more about the vision about the endowments? I thought those were really cool.
Well, I mean, is missional, because part of the challenge for some people that we've discovered as we've been listening is that for some people it's when you think about capital campaigns, you think about bricks and mortar, and when you think about endowments, you think about endowments, and you should never mix the two. Endowments are hard to raise. right? And so you should have a focused campaign on endowments, and you should have a focused campaign on capital. I think that you need to bring them together for two reasons. One is, my goal is to keep our operating budget as lean as possible. And so every year when we go into budget priorities mode, we have to look at our music endowment, our music fund spending. And my goal has been to somehow get our music spending about the same as our outreach spending. And we've come really close, more than probably any other church of our scale gives as much to endowment as we do to music. But our church works well by having an incredible music department. And if we could actually create an endowment and then grow it over time, we will take that portion of our operating budget and we'll make it smaller, because the endowment itself will fund those, say, staff singers or things like that. The second thing with mission and outreach, this endowment began when we received an enormous gift that was undesignated, and we have a practice, believe it or not, not that we'll do it in this, but we have a practice that the vestry has of taking 10% of that gift and moving it into outreach. So we tithe what we get that's undesignated into outreach. And so we decided to get the seeds of an endowment in mission and outreach. And our goal is to generate 4% from that endowment. So if we can reach our goal of $1 million, that will mean that we're going to have $40,000 a year that we can use to ensure that we're meeting the needs of mission and outreach. Because as you know, and I pray that this isn't going to happen, but you know, I had dinner Friday night with incredibly nervous. You know, this economy in Detroit is still cyclical, and whether we like that or not. And so by having a steady 4% draw from mission and outreach from an endowment, that means that no matter what happens, we can still do the work God is giving us to do. Because every time there's a downturn, all of these organizations that have been generated to minister to the last and the least, all of those institutions that get built up through hope and prayers and hard work, they all tend to go out of business and they all starve. And so if we had that endowment, then we can keep people going. And I think it's incredibly important. I happen to be close to an abbot of a monastery when we went through the last big recession. And he was located in Boston. And I remember him saying to me that he went to a meeting and he said, "Do you know that in the last 10 months, 150 nonprofits went out of business in Boston?" Think about the social impact of that 150 nonprofits going out of business during a recession. We can't have that happen in Detroit. We are already lean on the ground when it comes to nonprofits, even though it seems like you turn around and you run into somebody who's got one, right? We need to continue to build up so that we can support those things. So those are a part of our mission. What other questions? Linda, yes, this is good.
Maybe more a statement than a question.
Sure.
But getting back to the church and its growing and the growth of large churches, I think a lot of that depends obviously on getting young people to come into the church. And a lot of that depends on education. Mm-hmm. And I applaud what we're doing here now because I think it's so much better than anything in the past. I mean, anything that was offered to my children. And I just see that as really a core growth strategy for the church.
Without question, and that's you're so right, and we've been placing more and more resources behind our children and youth. This year in particular, we've actually added staff resources to the youth so that we can continue to have a really robust youth ministry. We hired someone with enormous amounts of experience in youth ministry, Kelly Stanislawitz, which is her maiden name, but her new name is Haddad. Is it? Is it? her dad. She just got married. And she brings an enormous amount of background. Our children's ministry is growing in the last 4 years like it's never grown before. So I think the more we can do that, the better. I think that you're going to perennially, no one has really cracked the nut on youth ministry anymore. The old time where you'd bring the attractive young person who would wear a cable knit sweater and play the guitar and the kids would flock around, those days are over. I mean, they even are over at like big churches that are like denominational, and at places like the church on Maple Road, I won't say its name, which had a huge youth ministry. So what we're finding is that youth ministry needs to be relational. And so one of the things for me that I view as a step forward, last fall I did 6 or 7 college recommendations for our youth. When I got here, no one asked me for a recommendation. Now, 7 a year. And that means that they're building relation here, and those relational networks can grow over time, because if you start young and they develop a deep relationship, all of that kind of spider webs, and that's really going to be the way we keep in business. Any other questions? We got room for one more if I'm brief. I was kind of. You're so amazing. It's got ice in it, too.
So if nobody has...
I have a question.
Okay.
So I've been so good, and I'm going to be good at the sermon today, promise. One of the things that people have probably had some sticker shock with is the $14.55 million number, and they think that's just astronomical. And you are right. It is a big number. We built that up by looking at the general giving potential and the general giving history of this parish, and actually kind of thought if we had anything like the claim that some of the other things that you support have in your life, that you would probably support us in this campaign well. And that allowed us to dream a little bit. That number is going to go through some revisions. I don't think it's going to revise up, but it might. It might go down. But what I can say is I believe, and this is me speaking for myself, I believe that number is achievable.
I have one other comment.
Sure.
I think, as I said, I think you could be very successful with this campaign. I also believe that we have to be very sure that we remember that there are parishioners here, when you said you're going to give till it hurts, that they may very well give till it hurts, but when that hurts them, they are at a very low figure. I can remember when the Cranbrook School Boards decided that, they didn't decide it eventually, but there were proponents, and I was chairman at the time, who said you can't get on this board unless you give X number of dollars. You tell the person up front, we'd like to have you join the board, but we're going to require you give X number of dollars per year. I was vehemently opposed to that because I think people can contribute not only to a board but to a church in many ways, one of which is money, but there are many ways that people cannot do it through money and they do it otherwise. And I'll make sure we don't cut those people off.
I cannot agree more. And what's interesting about this church is there's been a long concern for the people that we've known over years to give thanks for their service, and also to recognize that they give as they give and as they can and as God has called them to give. So I have no doubts that we're going to do that. And you know, one of the I don't want to name names or anything like that, but one person who has come on like gangbusters to support is probably someone who can't give a lot in terms of the actual dollars, but they're willing to actually go and see other people. And they're willing to put their names behind it. And that's a really important thing because they see that this is going to be the future. Keep in mind that the 1935 building that we have built, that was done after the Sunday school movement came on board. So when this church was built, believe it or not, there was a new movement called Sunday school where you'd bring the kids in and give them kind of curriculum that's appropriate to their learning and their capacity to learn, and you gave them things to do. All of that had to be kind of invented in the late 19th century, in the early 20th century. And so when this church recognized the mission that was being missed, they immediately built this addition. And where our offices are now, that was in the original plans, they called that the bonus area. They had no idea that we were going to be using that for office space. So we're going to try to build something that's going to allow us to not have to place a shovel to dirt in this area for probably another 90 years. And so we are being ambitious, but we also know that we don't know how things are going to be configured because we don't know exactly what church is going to look like. And we're going to need everybody to be part of that imagining. It's going to be everybody's work to do that. Thank you so much, guys.